Hello, everyone. We're going to move into Chapter 7 beyond the inverted pyramid even deeper. We started talking about this material last week, and we're going to go beyond the surface and talk a little bit more about different kind of structures you're going to find in narrative writing. In this chapter, which you should read as well as do these PowerPoints, we're going to talk about how to use the techniques of narration, how to use chronology structure, how to use the news narrative structure, how to use the focus structure to use other kinds of news stories, and then your book also talks about service journalism formats. Again, just to recover, or just to go over again what an inverted pyramid is, and we did it before. It's a simple and basic approach to writing news. Of course, it provides information about a news story. It orders the facts from the most important to the least important. It focuses on the 5 W's and the H. It's easy to edit. It's easy to write, and has a certain expectation from the writer and the reader how it's going to flow. Again, the inverted pyramid, upside down pyramid. We've done that. We're moving on to narrative news stories. Last week we focused on leads. Now we're going to take a deeper look and look at sort of the entire structure of a story. The inverted pyramid style gets to the point as quickly as possible and saves the readers, listeners, viewers time, but it's not the way to tell stories, right? And if we're going to engage our audience intellectually and emotionally, if we want to entertain them as well as inform, we have to use writing techniques that promise great things to come and then fulfill that promise. And we're going to look at 3 specific areas that do that right now. Some of the best narrative news stories use techniques like scene recreation, dialogue, foreshadowing, anecdotes. All these can build the story around characters dealing with tension, and they follow the story through to a rewarding resolution. That's what you want to think about when you're moving beyond the inverted pyramid. How can I go from just the facts to an engaging and informative story? Exposition is the ordering of facts. Exposition is very much what inverted pyramid is. Narration is the telling of a story. So when we use vivid scenes and dialogue and foreshadowing and anecdotes in chronology to build to a climax, we're going to call that structure narrative. The stories that you read now, whether they're for fun or for school, whether they're fiction or nonfiction, use narrative storytelling techniques, right? A really good news story should read like a really good book, except that it's true. Vivid scenes. We should always try to make our readers see, smell, feel, taste, and hear our stories by showing and not simply telling in our writing, right? You want to gather information with all your senses. When you're doing a story, when you're covering an event, what does it look like, smell like, feel like, taste like, right? You want to bring the person in to the story by engaging their senses, right? And you also want to be careful about not telling, but showing. So don't tell us something is funny or sad or frightening. Show us in the writing. Dialogue is another way that you can do narrative news structure, narrative news writing in an effective way. Dialogue, using direct dialogue between 2 or more people, allows the narrator and the reporter to recede, and the characters will then take center stage. If you use quotations, you're telling the reader what the sources said, which is great, and it's certainly an important part of reporting. But if you use dialogue, you disappear and the reader listens directly to the character speaking as if they were there, right? The thing you want to be careful about is making sure that you can trust the dialogue sources. But anyway, here's an example from your book, right? Traditional paraphrasing on the left. They're quoting Henry Lathrop directly. During the public hearing, Henry Lathrop accused the council of wasting taxpayers' money. If you don't stop voting for all this spending, I'm going to circulate a recall petition and get you kicked off the council. The mayor responds, and this quoted. But when they, on the right side, when they put it into a dialogue situation, we have Henry talking. It's describing what he's doing, his actions. It's certainly engaging our senses more. Talks about pounding the podium. And then talks about Mayor Gold slamming her gavel. Again, using our senses to bring us into the story and to put it in a dialogue back and forth. So it's not just a he said, she said, but a recreation of how and when it happened, right? And the idea is that it's more engaging, more interesting, and more effective to do it that way than it is to just be pure exposition. Dialogue is that key element of recreating key scenes, right? And just as I said, be realistic though. If you weren't there for the actual conversation or scene, be really careful about depending on the participants to remember exactly what was said and done. Of course, if you are there for the actual conversation or scene, record that dialogue, right? Record it on your phone, record it on your camera, record audio or video or both, right? Whatever you need to do so you can back up what you're saying happened. You're there to report and record what you're finding out. And the best way to do that is to actually record. And then you actually won't get the dialogue wrong. You'll have it as a proof, right? As your sources. Another way that you can use traditional sort of narrative techniques in your writing is to foreshadow. Foreshadowing advertising something that's coming. Every lead foreshadows the story, whether it means to or not, and the most successful narrative leads not only tell but promise more good stuff to come. Right? Using a phrase like "the worst was yet to come" in the opening part of a story is another way of saying "read on." It gets even more interesting, right? So again, you're engaging an audience in a way that is beyond just the facts. Anecdotes are another way to incorporate narrative storytelling into your writing, your reporting. Anecdotes are stories embedded within stories, and they can be happy or sad or funny or serious, but whatever their tone, they should be there to illustrate a point. What's really interesting is that people are much more likely to remember anecdotes used in a story longer than anything else in the story, even the facts. There's something about anecdotes, little stories about things that are going on within a story that really make an impression on people. Facts inform, but anecdotes engage and entertain as well as inform. We're going to look at some examples as we do our discussion board work this week. Chronology structure is a new story structure we look at in your book that essentially tells the story in the order in which the events occurred, but unlike the inverted pyramid style, it does not necessarily begin with the most important news. It's often going to begin at the point in the story that has the maximum dramatic interest, right? This comes from your book, and it talks about, here we have the inverted pyramid versus chronology, right? And you'll see how they're different, right? Inverted pyramid, you start with those facts. Chronology, you want to start at a dramatic point in the story. What's the most engaging? What's going to get my readers really into this? Let's start there, right? So that's chronology structure, right? When we look at news narrative structure, that's going to begin at a point in the story that's the most interesting place to begin. Not necessarily the most dramatic, but certainly the most interesting. Something that you deem something that's going to engage and incite and inform the audience member that's interesting, right? Here's an example from your book, right? Again, breaking it down into a graph about how you begin at an interesting point in the story as opposed to simply an inverted pyramid structure leading with just the facts, right? We have one more one to look at, and that's going to be focus structure. Focus structure is when you tell stories by focusing on one individual or group that represents a bigger population, and it allows the writer to make big issues really relatable and meaningful by connecting them to one individual or group. That's what we call focus structure. Again, here's an example, a breakdown graphic one. Focus on individual, transition to the larger issue, report on the larger issue, return to the opening focus. The lead that you'll see in most of these are what we call non-news leads. It's a lead that features something other than basic exposition. It's a lead that focuses on a person we just talked about, a lead that reads like a mystery, right? A lead that draws you in and gets you to... When we talk about the nut paragraph, or sometimes it's called nut graph, is a paragraph that gives the theme of the story and summarizes some key facts. And it's like the lead in an inverted pyramid story, right? But it is different. It's not the first paragraph in the story. So a nut graph will come after a lead that starts at a dramatic point in the story. So like a chronology lead or a news narrative lead or a focus lead. And then summarizes key facts, sort of gets us back into the news story of it all, right? So a nut graph will come after a lead that is traditionally a non-news lead. So if you're going to start your story with something other than inverted pyramid style, if you're approaching a story with narrative news as your guide, you need to have a lead, which will typically be a non-news lead. It won't be an inverted pyramid lead, and then you'll follow it with a nut graph, right? So you can almost think of it as the lead is drawing them in, and then the nut graph comes in and establishes the story in more traditional sense. Most non-inverted pyramid style news features these two components: the non-news lead, the chronology, the news narrative, or the focus instead of inverted pyramid lead, and then it will have this nut graph, right? This is the basics that I want you to take away from this chapter, and we'll get into more in our discussion work. So make sure you do your discussion board work and your Blackboard work, and it's going to focus on all the things we talked about today, but then also material found in your textbook, and hopefully we can make it come alive more. All right, thank you.